So today we are super excited to have several different speakers with us. Primarily, this is Dr. Mel Webb. They are a professor from the Philosophy and Classics, as well as the Classics Department, as well as the Honors College. They're also the founder and director of the Philosophy and Literature Circle. That is a program at the Dominguez State Jail, which brings incarcerated scholars and undergraduates into, I guess, like, I'm reading straight off your LinkedIn because it sounded so good. A process of shared inquiry into what it means to be human, how to live well, and how we can best contribute to the flourishing of our communities. They specialize in like a lot of collaborative projects that span across different disciplines. Mel also has a theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and their work focused on trauma-informed theological responses to harm. So Mel, I don't want to take up too much of the time with the introduction, so I'm going to pass it over to you. And then if you could introduce our student speaker, Ruben, as well as our guest speakers that are on Zoom with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's very good to be here. And please give a round of applause to the amazing library team that really delightful working with Amy, with Veronica, with Steph, who pulled together things in special collections for the video that we had, and really recognizing community engaged research at UTSA. And so our presentation today is called Trust Across Divides, Learning with Incarcerated Scholars. And so here's what's going to happen. You're going to hear from me a little bit. All right, I've got 30 slides. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but I put a little QR code here. If you do want to look through them, that is available to you. After I talk for roughly 10 minutes, we're going to get to hear from Ruben Soto, who is a UTSA student. Please give a round of applause for Ruben here. Joining us, he's a program alum who came in with us in the spring 2023 semester. I'll introduce him a little bit more before I hand off the mic in a bit. And then we're going to talk some about program importance with Darwin Hamilton, who's with us online. Please give a round of applause for Darwin Hamilton. Darwin is one of our program's core community team members. So that's a group of folks who really provide guidance for us and consultation in terms of best practices, how we work with and respond to the realities in scholars' lives, both in the curriculum design and then in what kinds of supports we make available after the end of the program. Okay, so I've been teaching in prisons just over 10 years and was really excited when I came to San Antonio that there was so much interest in doing something that hadn't been happening in this region, even though Texas has some of the longest running prison education programs in the country. So in 1994, with the Omnibus Crime Bill, most prison ed programs got cut when Pell funding got pulled from being available to people in prison. So where there had been thousands of programs, they shrunk down to 13. 2 of those are in East Texas, but there really haven't been other programs outside East Texas. And the Honors College, as well as the College of Liberal and Fine Arts, were really receptive to the idea of starting to think about who we are as the University of Texas at San Antonio, and looking at who else is part of our community in San Antonio that we haven't been working with. And so starting the Philosophy and Literature Circle at the Dominguez State Jail, it is a prison, though Texas, we're unique. We have state jails. We're the only of the 50 states that do that. Jails are usually run at the county and city level. So it's sort of like a short-term prison. And we started an honors college program there called the Philosophy and Literature Circle. And this is really drawing off of Eddie Ellis. Eddie Ellis's real commitment to say, what we see first when we think about people in prison, it's just precisely that they're people. So this letter is one that we rely on in the program. We think about as something that guides us and this invitation that as we talk about folks involved in the program, we're thinking about people. We approach participants in the program as fellow scholars, fellow learners, fellow educators. So the mission of the Philosophy and Literature Circle is to cultivate collaborative learning communities so that people in prison and beyond can thrive and build trust across divide. We're really looking to respond to the reality in our shared culture that when we think about the school to prison pipeline, this idea that the punitive policies that are implemented in so many of our K-12 schools put some young people, disproportionately Black and brown young people, on a track into the carceral system and being cycled in and out year after year into that system, that doesn't only shape our prisons, that shapes our colleges, it shapes our universities. It affects who we have opportunity to be in shared space with in our classrooms, and who then completes their degrees and becomes leaders within our schools, leaders within our communities, and that we're all at a shared deficit because of the impact of mass incarceration in our society. And so our vision is to foster a world filled with thriving communities of trust and accountability that embody commitments to justice, peace, and freedom. And so our program structure is wanting to bring about that world we envision through compassionate, critical, and creative engagement with texts, ourselves, one another, our world at large. And we're doing this through what we call combined cohort learning. University students and incarcerated scholars gather together on a weekly basis in a classroom at the Dominguez State Jail on Thursday evenings. And we do what the program title says. We read works in philosophy, we read works in literature, we sit in a circle, we talk about them. We share out our own work. And it's a really vibrant experience as an educator and in working within community for imagining just what's possible for how we create forms of connection that the punitive approaches to justice that predominate in this country often really prevent through practices of isolation and exclusion. So here we are, the Dominguez State Jail. Within our state, we have between 97 and 104 prisons within our state alone. That's at the state level. That's not counting jails. We have 234 county jails, just short of the number of counties we have, because some counties share. We have a couple, we have about a dozen federal prisons and several immigration detention centers or immigration prisons as well. And so well into the over the 200 units that operate in some way through practices of confinement in our state. The one incarcerated scholar, after going through the program, shared with us that for those of us who have been deprived for, in some cases, many years of this sort of dialogue and intellectual stimulation, this course is a true blessing. It allows one to regain a sense of normalcy and fellowship to a world which has long since seemed foreign. It restores what has been taken and in a small but real way frees us again. And I share this as a piece towards what it is to start to imagine freedom together, and for us to also imagine and understand the value of what we have access to on a daily basis on a campus like ours, to be in dialogue, to have opportunity for intellectual exchange and stimulation, for our insights to be valued, for our voices to be valued. And I also appreciate the way this scholar worded this, that it's a small but real way. That this does not in any way displace the necessity of working for much larger transformation and thinking about what it is to change the conditions of confinement and the systems and policies in this country that lead to this forms of isolation and exclusion. But this is a small piece towards thinking about how we make more possible together. And one university scholar has also similarly shared that sitting with people who had been affected by incarceration made me realize that while I do have my own experiences to talk about, and those experiences are applicable, there are some experiences that I don't fully understand because I've never lived them. That realization has made me more open and capable of listening carefully. That one thing that we practice in the circle is really centering on the value of our own insight and voice, what it is to be able to share from what we've learned, and stand steady in that, while also knowing where our edges are, knowing what our limits are, and what it is that we need to be able to learn from people from different life paths of our own to see things that aren't readily available or readily visible to us, precisely because of those limits. So the situation in the U.S. is unlike any other in any other country at this point. Be incarcerated a higher rate in the U.S. than any of the other NATO founding countries. About 664 people out of 100,000 people in our country are behind bars at any given time. We outstrip that even within Texas. And so if Texas were in fact its own country, we would have the highest incarceration rate in the world. And that those impacts are really felt through state prisons, local jails, federal prisons, youth and involuntary confinement, and are disproportionate to our population. That our prison rates as of 2021 really focus on and target Black communities in this state in ways that are not proportionate to their population. So residents in Texas, about 41% are white, and about 34% of our prison population is white. Within Texas, about 12% of our residents are Black, but 33% of our prison population comes from Black communities in this state. And among Latino, Hispanic residents, 40% of our residents, Latino, Hispanic, and about 33% of our prison population represents this demographic. And demographic data like this isn't all there is, but this is, I think, a helpful picture to be able to see the system of justice we have is targeting those that have also been historically excluded from our institutions, our academies, our universities. And that as we think about what it is to support our student body, especially as a minority serving institution, we do really have to broaden and think about the impacts of this system within our communities and in the lives of our students, of our faculty, of our staff. None of us are untouched by this, and the impacts span generations. Each of these graphics, by the way, I'm pulling from their prison policy initiative. If you're wanting to learn more, they have a great set of resources to get into and to explore. And so the circle, however, is not. We do live in a culture where we think if we're going into a space like this, obviously it's about us, it's about our charity, it's about our generosity as an institution. And that's something we really have to resist. We are not going in, this is not a scared straight program for those of us who might come from a generation where that was a primary part of our education. It is not a way to understand life in prison. Going in and spending Thursday evenings in a classroom with people who are incarcerated does not give us any way to speak about what the reality is of living in a prison. And it's not to understand some mythic concept like the criminal mind or some such. We're not there in a voyeuristic way. And it's also not an opportunity to help or save people in prison. As I said, the deficit, the loss that is caused by the walls, these divides, is one that is shared. We need as much as anybody that we're going in and learning alongside of. And it's important for us to be able to name and recognize that, even as we recognize what it is that we have to offer. And it's also not a space to become a voice for the voiceless. We don't speak over others. We don't speak for others. Rather, we're thinking about and reflecting on what kind of leader, learner, friend do we want to be? What are the opportunities that we have to learn from and alongside people from different life paths? And how can we discern and practice the ways that each of us want to use our voices within our communities? we're not doing this either to then go into communities that we're not from and say, oh, you should start doing things this way. I learned this. I participated in a program at a prison, and now this is what I have to offer you. It's no, let's reflect on how have we been shaped? What does it change for us now that we've had opportunity to be in a community like this? And how do we bring that back along our life paths? Think about our career choices. Think about how we want to deploy our resources to show up in our relationships in ways that align with what we've learned about justice, about peace, about freedom through participation in a learning community such as this one. So we think about to be educated as knowing what your gift is and how to give it. And this cuts across multiple disciplines, any kind of background that we might be coming from. It doesn't privilege a certain kind of degree, but to claim to be on a journey together in this program, we're thinking about what it is for each of us to be educated and how we want to be able to give a gift in that regard. So critically, compassionately, creatively, as key parts of how we show up in the classroom. Again, doing seminar style discussions. And we're at our 5-year mark here. So this is a little bit of an overview of what that has looked like at UTSA. We started our first circle in the spring semester of 2019 at the Dominguez State Jail. 3 cohorts finished that year because we had the wacky idea we should do it over the summer too. And that really was not sustainable. We turned summers into peer support learning. We launched a circle through Trinity University at the Flores unit in spring 2020, and you know how that went. We very rapidly had to pivot that to correspondence. We were one of fewer than 7 programs in the whole country to operate continuously throughout the pandemic. We maintained and completed cohorts at each of the sites and worked really hard to be a steady and reliable presence to our partners on the inside as they weathered that. And they said they wanted to continue to see our programming offered. So we developed a whole correspondence curriculum that's really sustained us as we've transitioned back to in-person programming. We formed the core community team in January of 2021 and also were admitted to Project Freedom with the Jammy Sisterhood in that same year. And so having both accountability relationships at a local level with our core community team members, and then the Jammy Sisterhood is an organization really looking at equity questions and racial justice within prison education programs in light of the prison system's deep history in alignment with histories of enslavement in this country, and what it is that as we build these programs, we're not replicating the forms of education that have been done that actually deepen divides or that erase people's sense of their own dignity, voice, and value. And so the Jammy Sisterhood are some of our national level partners in that work. And in 2022, we were able to return to in-person operations. And just last year, we finished our first full year after 5 years of regular program operations at both sites. And we're really looking forward to what's ahead for us in 2024. And to kind of give you a picture of who's involved, we're a circle of circles. You're hearing from some folks within these different circles today. So we have the combined cohorts at DSJ that are operating. There's always kind of now program alumni in the background at both of the units. University students who provide forms of community and support to one another that have completed at those units, as well as faculty and staff at the universities. Core community team being at the center, the Jammy Sisterhood is our national partners. And so our core community team members being comprised of directly impacted leaders and community-based educators who really guide our program design and implementation. And so Dr. Susie Bannon, Jose Flores, Dr. Dwana Goldstone, Ellie Gonzalez, Darwin Hamilton, who we'll get to hear from today, Amanda Ireta, Dr. Judith Norman at Trinity, who guides the program there, Annette Price, and Dr. Alistair Welchman, who's been a big proponent of the program here at UTSA since its beginning. If you want to learn more, here's a QR code for the course description and program application. The incarcerated scholars apply. the university students apply, each being asked to state, what is your interest? What are you hoping for from this program? And tell us a little bit about a work of literature or philosophy that's inspired you. I'll come back to this in a second, but here I'm going to hand the floor over to Ruben Soto, who's going to come and speak with us a little bit about the UTSA student experience on this. He's an undergraduate research assistant currently with the Interdisciplinary Research Incubator team, studying humanities-centered education in prison as a social and structural determinant of health. So really looking to pivot away from stories that what counts as success is people not going back to prison, which is just sort of its own loop, but saying, how do we tell a different story about what it is to see success through our education programs? Ruben's helping us in that regard. He's an alum of the Philosophy and Literature Circle and co-founder of the student group Radicals for Abolition, Justice, and Equity, or RAGE, a San Antonio-based transformative justice collective that is committed to promoting healing, accountability, and ethical alternatives to punitive justice. So please welcome Ruben.
Well, thank you, Dr. Webb. And hi, everybody. I'm Ruben. Earlier in the slides, Dr. Webb kind of showcased what the circle isn't and what the circle can be. And I think it'd be really fitting to read from something that I have written about what the circle was to me. So I'd like to begin by reintroducing the open letter written by Eddie Ellis. In the letter, Eddie calls for us to begin to reconsider the language we use to describe people that are currently or formerly incarcerated. Inmate, convict, felon, prisoner. These are only some of the terms that we have grown accustomed to using to describe members of our community that are no different from you and I. When we use these terms, we limit one another. We limit our friends, we limit our family members, and we limit our community. When we use these terms, we limit ourselves and our imagination. By using these terms, we confine ourselves and limit our ability to imagine a world free of the false dichotomy presented before us of the people and the other. Eddie Ellis's open letter is a call for us to cease the use of these terms and instead to remember that behind these labels that we use are just people. But how do we forget? How do we forget that these are just people? For many, our proximity to a prison is not something that we regularly consider. There exists a space between the society we inhabit and the far, far away land of prisons. The space I'm describing is more than just the physical space between the institutions. It's also the mental space that we have carefully paved to separate ourselves from what we deem to be the other. Prison exists in a land far, far away because we deem it so. A land where only the worst endings happen to the worst characters. It is because of this separation that we never have to spare consideration for the people that are confined there. For many, rarely is it that we ever have to consider our proximity to a prison, and even rarer is it that we have to consider the proximity to the people that reside there. To me, the Philosophy and Literature Circle exists as a response to the challenge Eddie Ellis presented, to invite the consideration he describes in his open letter, and ultimately, to deconstruct the space that exists between us and the people deemed to be the other. Through the Philosophy and Literature Circle, I gained the opportunity to cultivate a community of scholars that would otherwise be impossible. Through the philosophy we read, the poems we shared, and the conversations we had, our community was crafted as a space that existed with dimensionality that isn't properly characterized, but the tiny room in the education building we used. We existed somewhere other than Dominguez and other than San Antonio and other than UTSA. Our space existed in a world of imagination that is only possible when you're able to consider what Eddie Ellis is asking us to. When we remove the space that exists between people. This day, I still find myself thinking about the lessons learned and connections made that would otherwise be impossible. For example, much of my writing today is still deeply influenced by DJ, a scholar of the circle. Listening to DJ recite his poetry in the circle inspired me to write, and for the first time in my life, recite poetry aloud. As a poet, DJ's work pushed me to find my voice, and for that, I'll always be grateful. When I think about the circle, I think of DJ, and E.T., and Robert, and Juan, and Brian with an I, and Brian with a Y, and so many others. Because when I think of the circle, I think of the people who I got to share the space with. While my time in the circle may be over, the space we created still exists. It is from this space that my imagination has been nurtured, and I have since been drawing upon to work towards creating a world where the far, far away land of the prison is no longer needed. The abolitionist framework that I'm describing has stuck with me since the circle and has influenced my research at UTSA and has motivated my application for graduate programs to create this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really good to hear some of Ruben's experience in this, and we'll have some opportunity for questions soon. I would now like to invite Darwin Hamilton. Darwin's a member of our core community team. He's one of the first people I got to know when I moved to Texas through a network of folks, and he's really helped us keep our own sort of vision for this program grounded. He's a senior accountant, a criminal justice activist and advocate, and author of his self-published memoir, 25 Years Later, A Sentence from Crime to Redemption, Resilience, Advocacy, and Leadership. His personal mission is to reduce the stigma of formerly incarcerated people. Darwin has served as co-chair of the board of directors for Grassroots Leadership, an organization which works for a more just society where prison profiteering, mass incarceration, deportation, and criminalization are things of the past. And he formerly served a 2-year term on the executive committee of the Austin-Travis County Reentry Roundtable and co-chairs their partner organization, the Reentry Advocacy Project. Please welcome Darwin. And while he speaks, I'm going to stop screen share so we can see him here. He's joining us from Austin. Thank you, Darwin. Please welcome him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mel, for that introduction and sharing a little bit about me. Some of that is outdated, but still relevant. So first, I want to say it's an honor to speak to all of you young scholars and academic professionals and great minds, and to be in this space and be also considered one of them. I believe I've been with the Philosophy and Literature Circle since its inception is when I got to know Dr. Mel Webb. What I've found through participation and having the opportunity to speak to some of the undergrad students at UTSA and Trinity is that the curiosity is the same, whether you've been incarcerated or not. The collaborative efforts to learn through questioning is what I found fascinating when I visited one of the units here recently. And the reason this is valuable is because during my formative years, or what would normally be my academic formative years, I was incarcerated from the age of 19 to 20, almost 25. And for me, during what would be my formative academic years, I was incarcerated from the age of 19 to 24. And one of the things that I had hoped to do while I was incarcerated was attend a college program. However, there are limitations for that kind of opportunity because you have to make a decision whether or not you'll be reassigned to a maximum security unit or versus staying on a medium security unit. And then having enough time to be able to complete the programming. Well, one of the things I'll never forget, one of the correctional officers said to me was, well, the state has already paid for your education once, and we're not going to do it again. So that was quite disheartening. So what I'm saying is I didn't have an opportunity to attend a higher ed program while I was incarcerated. Nevertheless, I focused on educating or self-educating myself through reading and study. I was never someone who spent a lot of time reading books, but when you're confined and isolated into a space, literature is a form of escape. It is also a way to improve what I would say is your imagination, your thinking, your vocabulary. I think one of the most powerful things that literature and reading does is improve the veracity of your vocabulary and what I would call your verbal arsenal. I was someone that was always fascinated by words and word usage and how to frame messaging. And so that is where I developed what I call my strengths. I discovered my strengths while I was incarcerated for public speaking, and getting that courage and that confidence all came while I've been incarcerated. And these are the gifts, time, talent, treasure that I give back, so to speak, in some of the work that I do. I am one of the co-founders of the Reentry Advocacy Project that really started, I would say, as an organization where we didn't use person-centered language. We were once called the Ex-Offenders Council because we didn't know about the use of harmful language and how it demeans and removes your humanity. And as we've become more educated in this work over the past decade, we realized, to Eddie Ellis's message, that I am not a convict. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I am a person with justice involvement, but also you can simply call me by my name, and that is sufficient. And that is the kind of messaging that I intend to share to have the most social impact, because all too often, due to stigma that is ascribed to those of us who have been incarcerated, that we're not supposed to be intelligent, articulate, or sophisticated. So I am a living refutation against all of that, because I want to show people that there is hope and possibility of what you can be versus what you can't be, or what they ascribe you to be. So with that, um, I will close, and I look forward to engaging with you all further.
Thank you, Darwin, so much, and thank you, Ruben, so much, and thank you all. I'm gonna remove this if that's okay. Cool. Oh, that feels so much better. All right. So we have some time for questions, for comments. There's always more we can share. We've worked hard to make this digestible along with your meal and before whatever's next for you. But we would love to hear questions, comments, what's on your mind. We don't have to be fully formed.
Hi, Mel, Melissa Golke, Special Collections. I have a question about books, the available of libraries to individuals who are incarcerated. What is their access? And for those of us that work in libraries, how can we assist if we have the ability to get books into facilities? How can we do so? Is there a program that's available to us?
I love that question, Melissa. Thank you. And I wonder, Darwin, would you be willing to speak to that first?
Yeah, certain books are, of course, screened, but what I found is, as long as they come from an organization, Japanese Sea Church, or even Amazon, books can be sent into the units. I don't think there's, yeah, they usually list like a restricted reading list, but I wouldn't know exactly what that is.
Yeah, this is there's something called the Inside Books Project that I think sends books in from point of sale. And then we've done a couple donations directly through the Wyndham School District's library. So the biggest school district in Texas is the Wyndham School District. They operate GED programs in all of the Texas state prisons. And they operate the general libraries, part of their contract agreement. They're not embedded with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. They're a parallel entity in the state. This is different. I've taught in prisons in 3 or 4 other states, and this just, it took me so long to wrap my head around this in Texas. The education directors are not part of the prison. They're part of the school district. And to donate to a library is donating to the Wyndham School District. And we can definitely talk about ways that that can look. I've been in conversation with some of the public librarians in town about what forms of programs they often get handwritten requests for books. And it could be something that if that's something our libraries are wanting to do, that we can think about how we make it known to people inside that they can write to UTSA Libraries and request certain books or materials, articles to be printed out. But as Darwin said, there's often a list of books that are restricted, and it really just depends on getting past some of the censors and making sure folks know, here's a resource, how can we do this with you? Thank you.
What were some unintended outcomes of the circle, if any?
That is a great question. Thank you. Ruben, do you want to speak to this? What are some unintended outcomes of the circle, if any?
When I think of unintended outcomes, I think of the organization that was briefly mentioned, Rage. Rage started as a conversation at the end of like my time in the circle. I didn't go in thinking I would like do something or attempt to do something like create an organization based around the idea of abolition. But it kind of, yeah, it just started to happen naturally at the end with conversations of other people that were involved in the circle, people outside of the circle that were interested in what I was doing and what we were talking about. Yeah, that's definitely something that wasn't intended, but I'm really glad it did happen.
Excellent. I know we also have some other folks here. If you've been involved with the Philosophy and Literature Circle and you're here, would you mind standing up? I know I didn't tell you I was going to do this. But thank you. These are some folks too that for questions like that would have their own responses and answers. So Dr. Welchman, Jazbeth, Eva, Pierre, thank you for being here. I think there's a delightful way that we're looking to have and build out community precisely as Ruben's doing, as some of these students and faculty are also doing. We'll have you all give them a hand too. So thank you. And I think we have another hand. Thank you.
Jesse Harasta, Department of Academic Introductions and Strategies. Hey,
Good
Mel.
to see you, Jesse.
So as a professor, it looks like you recruit students. Are you looking for your colleagues to recommend students? And if so, what would we be looking for and how would we go about doing that and getting them to apply? And what kind of might the process look like?
Thank you. I am looking to make sure students know about this opportunity and about expanded opportunities. I think that often students self-select. If they hear about this, they read what's here, they write in the application. They arrive in the class, they learn how demanding the schedule is, and they still say, yes, I want it. Often that means they're willing to put in the work that's necessary, no matter what our starting point is coming into this class. We all have a really steep learning arc. And a lot of the requirement of the class is, are you willing to be on that learning arc with us? Are you willing to really open and be ready to dive into text, to show up on Thursday nights at the jail, to ask the questions that there's always a little bit of something to make everybody uncomfortable. And for some of the scholars, they're like, I hear about this program and you say the word poetry, and I turned off. And then I heard people talking about it, and I was like, actually, maybe kind of I want to do that. It doesn't seem like it's only about poetry. And then I did it, and it was amazing. And I hear that often from university students too. So as much as faculty are in a position to get the word out that this is an opportunity, I have so far found that the students who come to the opportunity have been a fantastic fit. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Marian Cedeno from the Department of Economics. I am very interested about because you mentioned that what you guys do is more of like a seminar way of course. I wanted to learn more about the curriculum that you follow because I'm very interested about how do you guys keep students engaged, and at the same time, how do you deal with students that are on different levels? And at the same time, what does a regular Thursday night would look like for y'all?
Excellent, thank you. Um, yeah, our curriculum, it varies semester by semester. It is each Thursday night, we have a focal text, a short selection from a philosophy, reading from a short story. Um, Often though, that is more just the occasion for us engaging with each other, which is partially the answer to your next question, how as we come in at maybe different reading levels, different writing levels. One of the advantages of this being a public humanities program, we're not doing this at this point for college credit. We're not trying to show learning outcomes that meet certain college goals. The incarcerated scholars receive continuing education units from UTSA Professional and Continuing Education in Writing, and everyone's job is to show up. It's the main requirement of the program. And that means show up, yes, be present, but also bring your questions, bring your insights, trust your confusion, find a way to put that confusion into words, hold space for other people finding their way to naming their confusions. Let there be silence in the room. Be willing to take the risk of sharing your work. When you hear the work of someone else in the circle that's fire, that's never a reason to put our own work down. We don't use the excellence of others to denigrate ourselves. And really having that as sort of a shared agreement, a shared expectation, that means, okay, our orientation here is celebrating one another and to recognize the strength of what each person brings and how we build on that. And so we read Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail. That was requested by our first liaisons in the prison system. We read selections from Plato. We read short stories from Langston Hughes and Louise Erdrich, essays by Robin Wall Kimmerer. We have poetry packets around themes. The poetry is related to what we're reading, and people are writing poetry and reading that out. And then the curriculum culminates with a creative final project, where people write something in the style of one of the pieces that we've read. And each of the writings that students do along the way, they're peer reviewing. And so actually, I don't get involved in giving feedback. What I'm doing, I'm there as a facilitator, and there is a circle tender. And what that means is holding the space is the university students and the incarcerated scholars are together writing for readers they trust. And that does wonders for any of our writing, to believe that the reader we have is generous, and to actually feel like that continuation, that conversation gets to continue off the page. So thank you. Is there anything you would add to that, Ruben, having been in it, about your experience in being in it? You spoke a little bit to some of the poetry.
Yeah. I think when I think of my experience with the circle, I think it's important for any student who may be interested in participating to understand that it's presented as a challenge for a reason. Outside of the classroom environment that I described, the realities of being in a prison are kind of, they're pretty explicit in some ways, whether it's like the search into the prison or the walk to the education building. There's and even like sometimes when our classroom would kind of get briefly interrupted by like a count, those realities are still there. I think it's important to say that because it's equally important to recognize that I got to leave at the end of the day, you know. And when I think about the circle, I think about like, well, I got to go home and do all this reflecting. But these like, it was often described that you know, those few hours we were in the classroom were like the only time people had to kind of like have this escape. And I think it's equally important for you to recognize that as a student participating in this environment. I think aside, like if I think specifically about the work, like the poetry, I think it's just exactly how Dr. Webb described. There's a certain sense of like intimacy and like interconnectedness that you get from the space just because it's just you and a group of people together for like 3 hours at a time once a week. You get to know someone. And it's not just like the scholars that are currently in Dominguez, it's also like the other scholars that are might be coming from UTSA. I feel like I've gotten so close to like people that were involved in the classroom with me in ways that I would have never had with any other seminar or lecture or whatever you think it is. Yeah, it was, and I'm really grateful for that too.
Thank you. And I'm also going to kick this question up to Darwin, who just recently visited with us at the Torres unit with a circle of program alumni doing some work around public speaking. So Darwin, would you share a little bit of what you did in that session?
Yeah, one of the things, of course, that I love is public narrative, the power of public narrative and telling your story. So Dr. Mel asked me to do that with the cohort that night. And framing your story is one of the challenges and the questions of where do I begin? How much do I share? So I modeled my story based on Professor Marshall Gans with Harvard in telling your story from the challenge, the choice, and the outcome is where you can begin your story. And so I got a lot of questions on, well, what do I say? Where do I begin? So I modeled that in two different versions of sharing my public narrative and what you're willing to share and what audience is deserving of hearing your story. And that yielded some fascinating um, writing and storytelling in the weeks that followed from what I heard. I wish I had been there to join them, but I found that night to be the most rewarding for me personally because it was coming full circle, having been incarcerated and incarcerated on a unit that was designed the exact same way. So those spaces that we occupy are spaces that I had also been in. While I was incarcerated, I was a librarian, ironically, and usually that space held is in the library of the school building. And March makes 26 years since I've come home from prison, and I was visiting that unit. It was late February, I believe it was. And so that was the most rewarding thing for me was to engage with the incarcerated scholars and then hear about how they told and shared their story weeks that followed.
Thanks for that. And our gratitude to Darwin for the investment in the circle in that way too. It was so good to be in circle with him on the inside. We've been in circle together on the outside for so long. To get to sit together in the law library at the Torres unit and think together about curriculum questions. How are we embodying this?
Hello, everyone. LT Robinson, Dean of Students. Thank you all for sharing the insight about this really important work. And my question is, how might the UTSA community continue to support the important work that you all are doing?
Darwin, would you start with an answer to that too?
I think you said it, Mel, show up, continue to show up. Of course, the hierarchy is always funding, supporting the program. That's really kind of, I think, the challenge is to broaden our reach, where it's not just contained to Dominguez State Jail and the Torres unit. I think programs like this are important throughout the TDCJ system. So I would say the call to action would be to share what the philosophy and literature circle is doing in your own spheres of influence.
Thank you. And some of that is thinking about how we expand from what's been a certificate program to offering college credit. And we've been in those conversations in partnership with San Antonio College and looking at taking the philosophy and literature circle as sort of a seed bed for wider efforts within San Antonio across other institutions that have been interested in getting involved. And so for UTSA to be willing to be in that long game, because it takes, as Darwin said, the showing up part, and it's showing up again, and it's showing up again, and everything is slower than we ever want it to move. I think we can understand that in the UT system, which is a big bureaucracy, trying to coordinate with another big bureaucracy, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and find ways that all of that emerges, and to be steady in that support. And another piece being how we make our campus community a more welcoming space, more intentional about how we think about already supporting people who are directly impacted by this system, because there's no way that this system, as big as it is, and that we're untouched by it. It's here, its impacts are here. How are we being intentional about seeing one another in that on our campus? Having that as an intentional form of student support for those with loved ones inside, for those themselves who might have been inside at some point in their lives, and reducing that stigma.
For me, I think the thing that'd be really important to add, especially as like a call for the student body or anybody that might be interested, is to really just take Eddie Ellis into consideration, and to just listen to what he was saying. You know, if are we or are we not okay with the dichotomy presented before us? Are we or are we not okay with referring to people with labels that are so negatively loaded that they kind of change our perception of who they are, what they can do, whether they belong in our communities or not? Yeah, free your imagination a bit. Think of a world that's a little different, you know? I think that just doing that goes a long way, if I'm being honest.
Thank you.
All right, well, hello? Okay, there you go. All right, so thanks everyone. Thank you again for coming to our program. It makes me very happy to see representation from faculty, students, and staff from all these different departments across campus. And I know some people had to leave for classes and meetings and everything, but thanks for showing up. And also, can we get another round of applause for Mel? Thank you. And I also wanted to acknowledge and thank the library team, like for helping with all the behind the scenes stuff. Wouldn't have been possible without you guys. So thank you so much. And as you are leaving, I know you mentioned humane language in prisons, and I did not forget the handout you sent me. I just forgot to bring it over. So if you haven't picked one up yet, we have handouts. So as you leave, you can pick up one of those. And we also have these amazing zines that our peer coaches, Rachel and Ileana over there, put together. So if you you can kind of see it, but they're orange, very beautiful. Yeah, and if there's still pizza in the back, and also at the table over there, if you came in early enough, there was a video that was looping that was talking about what's called the Tower Book. That's from our special collections and archives, and the star of that, Deanna, is actually over there at the table. If you have questions for her, we also have all these zines and letters from prisons in our archives. So if you want to, before you leave, just stop by and take a look at what we have. Sign in if you didn't. Oh yeah, sign in if you didn't. Just so we can keep track. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you're willing, if you need to go, go. But if you're willing, one way we end our circle is with a loving kindness meditation. So even if you're moving, you're welcome to. If you're open to receiving this, this is how we end every Thursday night session. It's 4 phrases. I'll repeat them 3 times. So take this in for whatever's next for you. And this is an extension from the scholars, from our core community team, from the students to you. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be loved. May you flourish. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be loved. May you flourish. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be loved. May you flourish. Thank you all.